Hello, my cherished family. It's wonderful to have you back at Wisdom Post Stories, a place where our souls unite through powerful narratives. We begin with gratitude. Divine Creator, thank you for connecting us across oceans and mountains today. Protect, strengthen, and inspire each listener through stories filled with wisdom and compassion. Amen. Tell me, from which part of our beautiful planet are you watching? Did previous stories touch your heart? Your thoughts bring warmth and meaning to this gathering. Sometimes circumstances force a person into doing things they never thought they were capable of. I came from a respectable and honorable family, a virtuous woman, but life took a turn that pushed me past every boundary I had ever known, to a point where even thinking about it now fills me with overwhelming shame. I committed a sin so grave that I no longer feel worthy of life itself. I cannot bring myself to look in the mirror, even 2 years after that fateful night. The face staring back at me doesn't feel like mine anymore. I feel as though I'm lost, a shadow of who I once was. That single night destroyed my life completely. The night I let my father-in-law into my bed after my husband's words swayed me. One night, one decision. It turned every moment of my life into an unending torment. A truly honorable, loyal woman would never even glance at another man, let alone spend the night with him. But I did. I spent an entire night with my father-in-law in his bed, and the events of that night are so unsettling that even you might be shocked to hear them. What my elderly father-in-law did to me that night has left an indelible mark on my heart, a memory I cannot escape. Forgetting it is impossible. On that night, I completely surrendered to him. My marriage was only 6 months old at the time. I lived in a small household, just me, my husband, and my elderly father-in-law. I had been raised in a good family, taught to respect my elders, and so I naturally began to show great care and deference toward my father-in-law. Part of this was because I had never known the bond of having a father. My own father had passed away from a sudden heart attack a month before I was born. The loss hit my mother so hard that she became chronically ill. From then on, our life was full of struggles. But my mother managed to protect our dignity and keep our household afloat. She raised me with honor and eventually married me off to Jabir, entrusting me to his care. When I arrived at my husband's home, I found in my father-in-law a paternal figure I had never had before. Naturally, I drew closer to him and tried to take care of him, but soon I noticed his behavior toward me was very different. He would look at me in a peculiar way, never responding to my words, but instead observing my every move. I couldn't help but feel his eyes on me, even while I worked around the house. On more than one occasion, I turned around suddenly to find him staring at me. He would sit with a newspaper in his hand, pretending to read, but his gaze was fixed on me. It began to feel unbearable. By the second month of our marriage, I gathered the courage to talk to my husband, Jabir. "Your father's behavior is very strange," I told him. Jabir looked at me briefly and replied, "If possible, stay away from him. He's not someone you should be around or talk to. You don't know what he's like." I was taken aback by his response. Instead of defending his father, Jabir warned me against him. "In the beginning, I didn't say anything on purpose," he continued, "because I didn't want you to think ill of me. But by now you've spent 2 months in this house. You must have noticed his true nature. It's better if you don't go near his room." His words sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't just cautioning me, he was confirming that his father's intentions were far from honorable. That realization left me deeply frightened. I spent the entire day alone at home with my father-in-law while Jabir was away, and now I couldn't shake the fear that perhaps I had put myself in a dangerous situation. From that day forward, I started to take extra precautions. My behavior toward my father-in-law grew distant on its own. I made sure to keep myself covered in a large scarf at all times and avoided being in his presence as much as possible. When it came to serving meals, I would quickly place the food in his room without sitting or making conversation, then hurry back out before he could engage me. One day, while rushing through the house chores, I was coming down the stairs with a load of freshly washed laundry. My foot slipped and I fell badly, landing hard on the floor. The noise must have startled my father-in-law because he came out of his room and rushed over to me. He knelt down, took hold of my injured foot, and began straightening it. Shocked, I instinctively yanked my foot away and held it myself. He stopped what he was doing, startled by my reaction, and asked, What's wrong, daughter-in-law? Is something troubling you? I couldn't respond. Tears streamed silently down my face as I tried to process my emotions. He offered to help me stand, but I refused his support. Instead, I clutched the stair railing and struggled to get up on my own. He stepped back, watching me with a mixture of confusion and hurt. Then he turned and went back into his room without another word. I spent the rest of the day sitting in the same spot, too pained to move. I couldn't even prepare dinner. My father-in-law eventually ordered food from outside and placed some in front of me. I was too hungry to refuse, so I ate in silence. That evening, when Jabir returned home, I told him about my fall. Instead of showing concern or sympathy, his first question was, "What did my father do?" I told him honestly that his father had been considerate and had tried to help me. Jabir's expression soured instantly. "It's all just an act," he scoffed. "He's pretending to be nice in front of you, so you'll side with him and think poorly of me." His response left me stunned. How could he say such a thing about his own father? I asked him, "How can you talk this way? He is your father, after all." But Jabir glared at me and snapped, "Don't call that old man my father. He may have been my mother's husband, but he was never a father to me. I never accepted him as my father, and he can never take that place. He's a selfish, deceitful man who tricked my mother into marrying him. Now he lords over me and acts like I owe him something. If this house weren't his, I'd have left a long time ago." This was the first time my husband had ever opened up about their family history, and his words shocked me. I hadn't realized my father-in-law wasn't Jabir's biological father. The way they interacted, the respect and deference Jabir's father-in-law showed him, had never hinted at anything other than a normal father-son relationship. Yet Jabir's anger and bitterness revealed a deeply strained dynamic. He pointed a finger at me and warned, "I'm telling you again, don't let him sway you. He might try to turn you against me. He doesn't want me to settle down, have a family, or claim my share of the inheritance. He already took control of my mother's property, and now he's trying to manipulate me. Don't fall for his tricks." I stood there silently, absorbing everything he said. My injured foot throbbed with pain, but Jabir didn't even glance at it. He didn't offer to take me to a doctor or suggest any help. He seemed far more concerned about the possibility of me siding with his stepfather than the fact that I was hurt. That night I lay awake, stifling my groans of pain. Jabir didn't come to check on me. The next morning, he left for work as though nothing had happened. He wrapped himself in an impenetrable shell of indifference, leaving me to struggle through the day on my own. I limped around the house, forcing myself to carry on with chores despite the stabbing pain in my foot. No doctor, no help, just me, my injury, and the growing weight of my husband's revelations. When my father-in-law stepped out of his room, he said, "You don't have to do anything in this condition. Just sit down. I'll take care of it." And in no time at all, he managed all the housework. He even prepared the meal. I was astonished at his efficiency. Even as a man, he handled everything effortlessly and swiftly. Watching him, I couldn't understand why Jabir thought so poorly of his father. To me, my father-in-law hadn't shown any overtly bad behavior, other than occasionally looking at me a little too intently. Still, I had no reason to complain. Months passed. The 5th month of my marriage came and went, and as the 6th began, the atmosphere in the house started to deteriorate. Jabir and his father were constantly arguing, and I never fully understood why. Jabir told me firmly not to go into his father's room, and though it felt strange and uncomfortable to avoid him, I reluctantly complied. I started keeping my distance. I didn't like it, but I also didn't want to go against my husband's instructions. One night, the arguments between Jabir and his father grew more heated than ever. When Jabir finally came into our room, he said something that left me utterly stunned. I could never have imagined him saying such a thing. As my husband, he should have protected me. Instead, he was suggesting something so shocking that I couldn't believe my ears. He wanted me to go to his father's room. I stared at him in disbelief. Jabir, the man I had married, was calmly asking me to do the unthinkable. When it sank in that he was serious, I fell to my knees and begged him not to go through with such a plan. "Please," I pleaded, "don't say something like that. I can't do it. I won't do it." With my hands clasped together, I stood before him, hoping my desperation would make him reconsider. But Jabir's mind was elsewhere. He was consumed by his greed, blinded by his desire for wealth. "Do as I say or I'll divorce you," he said harshly. "If you don't listen, you can pack your things and go live with your widowed mother. I'll send you away tonight if you don't agree." His tone was cold, devoid of any affection. I broke down, falling at his feet and pleading with him. "Please, don't force me to go through with this. Think about what you're asking me to do. I'm your wife, your honor. How can you do this to me?" My words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Jabir wasn't moved. He stood there unrelenting. "I'll give you one more chance," he said. "You can either go into that room tonight, or you'll leave this house as a divorced woman. Make your choice." I couldn't stop crying, and that's when his tone changed. He sat beside me and softened his voice. "Listen, Sherman, everything I'm doing is for our future. Don't you want our children to live a good life? We'll have kids one day. Don't you want them to go to good schools and have a better lifestyle? My job isn't great, you know that. My salary barely covers our expenses. But my father has money. If he wanted to, he could help me start a business. Instead, he's holding me back, keeping everything for himself. You know he tricked my mother into signing everything over to him. Now he's in control, and I have to bow to him. If you help me, we can get what's rightfully ours." He continued, trying to justify his plan. "This isn't wrong," he insisted. "I'm not stealing. I'm just claiming what belongs to me. He took my mother's wealth and made it his own. I'm not doing anything immoral. I just want my fair share. If you stand by me, we can reclaim my mother's inheritance. Once I have that, I'll never have to bow to him again." When he kept talking, I realized he was trying to scare me with worries about our children's future. And I just sat there silently, listening. When he finally stopped, I quietly said, "If you'd like, I'll talk to your father. I'll ask him to help you start a business." My suggestion infuriated him. He picked up a vase and smashed it against the wall. "Do you want me to become a beggar? You think I should stand in front of him with a bowl in my hands begging for coins?" he shouted. "I don't need his charity. I want to start something big, a real business. And for that, I need those properties. The land he owns is the key. But he'll never hand it over willingly." He stormed to the wardrobe, pulled out a bag, and threw it at my feet. Inside was a revealing, indecent outfit I'd never seen before. I had no idea when he'd bought it. "Put this on," he ordered, "and go to my father's room. Do what I tell you, and we'll live the high life." As I held the outfit in my hands, shame and humiliation overwhelmed me. I had never worn anything like it in my life. I couldn't even imagine going before my father-in-law dressed that way. But there my husband stood, looming over me, not with a gun, but with something far worse, the threat of divorce. Those 3 words felt like a bullet to my soul. Fearful of the consequences, I reluctantly obeyed. Slowly, I changed into that wretched outfit, my heart sinking with every step. I couldn't bear to look in the mirror. I couldn't bear to think about what I was about to do. But my husband had made it clear that if I didn't comply, he would divorce me on the spot. I'd be sent back to my widowed mother, left to fend for myself. So trembling, I made my way to my father-in-law's room. He was just about to lie down when I entered. He turned and looked at me, his eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, I thought he'd be outraged, that he'd scold me for appearing in such attire. But instead, a faint smile crossed his face. "Come in, Sherman," he said. "Why are you standing at the door?" Tears welled up in my eyes. I struggled to compose myself. My husband had warned me, had made it abundantly clear that his father was a corrupt, indulgent man. And now, seeing his reaction, I feared he had been right all along. Suppressing a sob, I stepped into the room. My husband had coached me on what to do, instructing me to embrace his father, to hold his hand, to make him feel loved. But the thought of following through was unbearable. How could I do something so wrong, so utterly degrading? This was the man I had once respected as a father figure. A father-in-law was supposed to be like a second father. The idea of crossing that boundary was something I couldn't comprehend. "Close the door, Sherman," he said softly, snapping me out of my thoughts. I looked up at him in shock, tears spilling down my cheeks. He noticed my tears and stepped closer. He shut the door himself, and I felt my heart stop for a moment. What was going to happen next? He came closer, his voice calm and even gentle. "You're very beautiful, Sherman. So pure, so lovely." He reached out and took my hand. I couldn't hold back anymore. I burst into tears. I knew my husband had prepared me for this, had pushed me into this situation, but giving myself over to another man, especially a man I'd respected as a father, was something I simply couldn't do. Seeing me break down, he gently wiped away my tears. Then he poured a glass of water and handed it to me. I sipped it between my sobs, unable to lift my gaze from the floor. I felt so lost, unsure of what to say or do. "I know what kind of man my son Jabir is," he said after a moment. "He can't keep any woman happy. I can see that you're not happy with him. That's why you've come to my room at this hour, isn't it?" He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face, tucking it behind my ear. Then, with surprising gentleness, he tilted my face up toward him. I could see something in his eyes, a mix of pity and desire, and I felt a chill run through me. I wanted to scream, to run out of the room, but the thought of what might happen if I didn't go along with my husband's plan kept me frozen. Every fiber of my being wanted to reject this situation, yet I felt trapped, cornered by my own desperation and my husband's threats. When our eyes met, it felt as though my entire existence dissolved into nothingness. My father-in-law's gaze held me frozen as he gently said, "I want to see you happy, and I know you can't find that happiness with Jabir." His words were steady, yet I could barely comprehend them. My hands trembled as he placed his hands firmly on my shoulders. As the night passed, I became acutely aware of every moment, each second more overwhelming than the last. By morning, my world had changed in ways I never thought possible. When I left the room at dawn, I found Jabir waiting for me. His face shone with satisfaction. "So," he said, "where are the land documents? You must have gotten them by now. If not, surely you found something to use against that old man. Tell me, I needed to secure the land and start my business." His words cut me deeper than I thought possible. I looked him directly in the eye and said coldly, "I want a divorce. Just give me a divorce." Jabir was stunned. He froze in disbelief, his mouth slightly open before he stammered, "What? Are you out of your mind? You went into my father's room to avoid being divorced in the first place. Why would you ask for one now? What did he tell you? Did he brainwash you with promises of wealth? Have you decided to side with my father against me?" I couldn't contain my tears any longer. I began to cry, and through my sobs, I managed to say, "I'm not like you. I'm not heartless. Please, just let me go back to my mother. I don't want the land, the property, or anything else. I can't live like this anymore. What happened last night was more than I can bear." I reached for Jabir, trying to make him understand, but his face twisted in anger. "You're useless," he snapped. "You're nothing but trouble." "Fine. If that's what you want, then you'll have it." He spoke the words, and with them, the tie that bound us was broken. The divorce was final. Just as the weight of the words settled over me, my father-in-law emerged from his room. He faced Jabir with a look of both authority and disappointment. "From this moment forward, you no longer have a place here," he said firmly. "Leave this house. This is my home, and the land is mine as well. Your mother brought nothing with her when she married me, yet I provided for her. You don't understand anything. Now go." Jabir looked momentarily shocked but quickly stormed out, slamming the door behind him. He left behind a trail of bitterness and venom. As I stood there gathering my things, I realized the magnitude of what had just happened. My marriage was over, my life in this house was done, and the very man who had pressured me into a nightmare was now gone. I began packing my belongings, feeling hollow and lost. My father-in-law approached me, his expression softer now. "You can stay here and complete your waiting period," he said. "It's better than going to your elderly mother in this condition. She may not be able to handle the shock of your divorce." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. His eyes met mine with a gentleness I hadn't expected. Overwhelmed, I suddenly broke down, sobbing against his chest. He placed his hand on my head, whispering, "You are not alone. Don't ever think you are. I'll always be here for you. Whatever you've lost, I will help you find again." So I remained in that house, completing my waiting period in what had once been my father-in-law's home. Jabir's departure left a lingering sense of disgrace. He didn't leave quietly. He made sure to spread cruel rumors about me and his father. His accusations were vile, and they left me unable to even look in a mirror. Every time I tried, I saw not my own reflection, but the weight of the things he'd said, the judgment I feared from everyone around me. But my father-in-law was always there to offer reassurance. "You've done nothing wrong," he would say. "You don't need to lower your gaze for anyone. If anyone was in the wrong, it was Jabir. He never deserved you." As the waiting period drew to a close, I told my father-in-law that I wanted to return to my mother. Instead of agreeing right away, he gently asked my mother to come over. When she arrived, he sat her down and explained everything that had happened. She was overwhelmed by the story, tears streaming down her face. After a long pause, my father-in-law turned to her and said, "I want to marry you. Sherman has always seen me as a father figure. I'll step into that role and give her the security she needs." My mother was stunned. The idea seemed incomprehensible at first, but the sincerity in his voice eventually eased her concerns. In a quiet, simple ceremony, they were married. And with that, what had started as an unimaginable ordeal came to an unexpected, albeit unusual, resolution. My father-in-law didn't just call me his daughter. He proved through his actions that he was indeed an exemplary father. After his marriage to my mother, he started searching for potential matches for me. But thanks to my ex-husband Jabir's lies, my reputation had been tarnished to such an extent that no proposals came forward. Today I live in the same house with my mother and my father-in-law. He assures me that he will find a good match for me. But it's been 2 years since my divorce from Jabir. And during these 2 years, I've come to understand how I made a terrible mistake in marrying the wrong person and trusting his words. I am grateful, however, that my father-in-law was a righteous man who prevented that night from turning into a tragedy. He locked the door not for any immoral reason, but to teach me a lesson. That night, instead of doing something harmful, he held me by the shoulders and calmly explained that a person should never let themselves be driven by fear, especially not fear of a divorce. He told me that divorce is not the end of a woman's life. Just as a true believer does not commit wrong out of fear of death, a Muslim woman should not compromise her faith out of fear of divorce. He handed me one of my late mother-in-law's modest outfits, told me to change into it, and suggested I perform ablution. After I did so, he opened the Quran and began reading from Surah An-Nur, explaining its meaning as he went. I was captivated by his words. Until that night, I had never thought about God or faith in such a profound way. Surah An-Nur illuminated so many aspects of my understanding of Allah, His light, and the principles that He has set for us. My father-in-law's gentle and patient teaching revealed the deep beauty of our religion, and I spent the whole night listening. He also told me how surprised he was when I first came into the family. He couldn't understand how a good, pure-hearted girl like me ended up marrying his son. This marriage was arranged by Jabir himself through one of his friends, not by my father-in-law. He explained that he had never sought out the match because he knew the kind of man his son was. When he saw me managing household chores, he often wondered how someone from a respectable family had ended up with a spoiled son like Jabir. That night, my father-in-law opened my eyes to so much more than just the lessons in Surah An-Nur. He helped me distinguish right from wrong, to understand the rights Allah has granted women, and to see clearly that I should not continue enduring Jabir's oppression. He also shared the truth about the family property. Jabir had his eyes on that wealth, but my father-in-law showed me documents proving that it was all his rightful property, acquired before Jabir's mother came into the picture. This knowledge, along with the insight gained from Surah An-Nur, strengthened my resolve to end the marriage. But our society rarely forgives a divorced woman. No one cares to find out whether or not the divorce was her fault. Even though I made the decision to leave Jabir because of his wrongdoings, I became an object of social scorn. It's been 2 years and I still live under my father-in-law's roof. I avoid looking in mirrors because they remind me of that night, how close I came to making a grave mistake under my husband's influence. Were it not for my father-in-law's noble character and firm moral compass, I could have ended up in an even worse situation. I shudder to think what might have happened had he been as corrupt as Jabir claimed. His guidance that night was a saving grace. I want to tell all my sisters and daughters in faith, never let the fear of divorce push you into doing something that goes against your morals or religious principles. If your husband pressures you into something un-Islamic, stand firm and say no, even if he threatens you with divorce. As believers, our faith and our dignity are more important than anything else. May Allah protect our iman and guide us all on the right path.